General Budanov, the head of the HUR, Ukraine's military intelligence organization, has highlighted that Russia's on an expansion program. It's created 2 new military districts, or is planning to create 2 new military districts, and spend $1 trillion in investing and growing its military capability out to 2036. Putin has recognized that his military is not fit for purpose and is not doing well in Ukraine. So what he's trying to do is incentivize his wider military command and to send a message out to the Russian people that Russia's military capability is still strong, but not just to the Russian people, to those other countries that continue to give Russia tacit support. So China, India, and all the rest of it. He's trying to suggest that Russia is still a global power, even though Russia is proving that it can't even be a regional power with what it's doing in Ukraine. So it's a lot of it's smoke and mirrors, a lot of it is words, and that's part of the reason why we're seeing Russia building military bases along the Finnish border. And we're talking about these new military districts, we're talking about new formations, the creation of new armies. Russia doesn't have the capacity at the moment to build enough equipment to support what it's doing in Ukraine. I don't think by 2036, even if it throws $1 trillion at it, which it doesn't have, it's going to be able to generate the military capability it needs for these new military districts. Putin's a dictatorship. Funding something where you're in a total war setup, which Russia is something that he'll find the money somewhere if it becomes a priority. I think this is a war of words at the moment. I think General Budanov, it suits him to re-emphasize that, because we've just had the NATO contact group meeting where countries have been pledging more arms and funding to Ukraine. And we've got the Russia-Ukraine next round of Istanbul peace talks coming up this week, which very little is likely to come out of it. But again, all of this is setting the conditions. We're playing a game for President Donald Trump and his 50-day limit that he's put on Vladimir Putin coming to the peace table. So we're going to continuously see the threat discussed, emphasized, and in a, it isn't being over-egged. It's a realistic way, but in a way that's keeping that messaging focused at Donald Trump, going, we, the Ukrainians, are the good guys. We're watching this. The Russians, they're the bad guys. Please, President Trump, recognize that.
Germany will provide additional air defense systems and much needed ammunition. On top of that, I agreed with Pete Hegseth during my trip to Washington, D.C. last week that Germany will contribute to providing the 5 urgently needed Patriot systems as quickly as possible.
There's no real talk of Russia carrying out a mobilization to bring new personnel in to train them as troops for these new formations. And Vladimir Putin hasn't brought in compulsory mobilization for the operations in Ukraine. He's gone on active recruiting programs, and under the current system in Russia, where individuals are called up or mobilized for as part of a conscription program, conscripts legally are not allowed to be put into the front line of a conflict. So Vladimir Putin's getting around that by recognizing that many of the conscripts that they're calling up from the different parts of Russia, remember it is the huge, are not literate, and getting them to sign contracts to join the permanent military. So they're permanent contracts. They then can be sent to the front line. He's using financial incentives to get people to sign up to come to the front line. And the amounts of money that are being offered are eye-wateringly large for people who are earning nothing in their villages. And they know, or they're told, that if they die, their families will be looked after, again with sums that are eye-wateringly large compared to what anyone has ever seen. And that's why he's continuing to be able to recruit just enough to sustain what he's doing. I don't think he's going to be able to get enough people to try and grow the military in the way he's doing it. But that's a problem for the future. It's not a problem for today. Today is getting the messaging out to people. It's not actually doing it. One thing Russia is doing is learning as much as it possibly can out of the conflict. And it is adapting. Russia's adaptation in its drone technology and the way it's moved away from its armoured attacks to trying to get its troops going into the meat grinder on motorbikes and all the rest of it. Part of it's out of the fact that they've run out of armoured vehicles or running out of armoured vehicles, but also because they recognise that their armoured vehicles are very vulnerable to Ukrainian drones. The Russians, whenever they recognised that Ukraine had developed a better electronic warfare capability, very quickly got into fibre optic controlled drones. So tactics are changing all the time. The Russians are pretty good at changing the way they're doing things, at evolving their tactics. They're not very good at executing them when it comes down to the ground. Ukrainians are having to evolve and change as well. It's the nature of warfare. Warfare will evolve and will change to meet the threats that are coming from each side. And it's a race. It's who can invent the newest way of doing something to kill more of the other side quicker than the other side. And then when someone defends it against it, how do you then get around that defense? So, the boffins, the tactical experts, the scientists, and everyone else that's trying to work behind the scenes are as important as those that are on the front lines and trying to execute it. Russia's always had an interest in Africa. You look at a lot of the different African nations, and from old Soviet Union days, a lot of them were aligned with the Soviet Union. They were communist in their beliefs. They bought Russian kit and everything else. China has moved in and taken over big swathes of Africa. Russia wants to maintain its footprint in there. But from a modern perspective, Africa's providing a base for the Wagner Group to continue to operate in, and they become the new Africa Corps. The rationale behind that is threefold. One, to try and keep African leaders on side, and that's countries where they can hide money and move money through and all the rest of it that aren't necessarily subject to international sanctions. The second thing is as a source of recruitment. So the Russians want overseas personnel to come and fight for the Russians, and they're heavily recruiting inside Africa as well, if they can. And the third thing is underpinning the political decision-making across Russia. That political decision-making is underpinned by the wider criminal networks. The criminal networks run by the oligarchs. Given the increased sanctions that there are against the oligarchs themselves, against banks, against movements of oil, and the drop in the price of oil, there needs to be some other commodities that they can move around to get their money moving around the world, to keep them enjoying the lifestyle that they've always enjoyed, but keep them smoothing the different areas that they need from a political perspective. Africa gives them those opportunities. There's very little oversight from governments. They can be bought so that things can happen. Precious metals, gold, platinum, silver, and some rare earth metals in Africa are bountiful. They are valuable and moving around the world market, as is hardwood as well. So some other natural resources, it's surprisingly valuable when you start to look at it. And of course, gemstones, diamonds. Diamonds are easy for them to move around, and there are still enough people buying diamonds across the world who don't necessarily want to know where they've come from. And that allows the oligarchs to move their money around. But it also allows the Russian government, the underpinning element of it, to move money around, to grease the wheels of what it needs to continue to prosecute its war. Well, the peace talks, 23rd, 24th, Istanbul. Ukraine has said they're going to be there. I don't think President Zelensky is going to be there. We're certainly not going to see President Putin. Their officials are going to get around the table, and I think the most we might get out of it is an announcement for another swap of 1,000 prisoners or so, but I'm not expecting anything in any detail out of it. Putin doesn't want a peace deal, and he's got until the 2nd of September. Donald Trump's given him 50 days, so he doesn't need to make a decision now.